So I have learned a little bit about Queens and what a great place it is. And it's a real honor to get to share with you a few ideas that we've had, my friend and co-author Holden and I have had about the university, and frankly, how it can have a bigger impact on the world's biggest problems. So what I thought I'd do is to take a few minutes to hit what I think are the highlights of the book, and then a few new things, because we've had the good fortune of being asked to do a new edition in paperback, which will be coming out at the end of the summer, and the deal was we had to write a new chapter, which meant we had to think up some new stuff. And I'm going to try that on you, the first audience that we've had to talk about some new thoughts that we've had over the last 2 or 3 years, mainly from events like this. What you learn after a while as authors, like everybody else, steal shamelessly. So I get great ideas from audiences like yours, and then we write a new chapter. So we're going to leave plenty of time for questions, because I need some more new ideas, and I figure they'll probably come from this group. So starting off, what's really interesting and unique is this concept of, in the States we call it the research university. Here in Canada there are 4 or 5 truly great universities. And what isn't usually or often known is that these places are more unique than you might think. So here's a little factoid. Of the 85 institutions that existed in 1522 and still exist, and that includes Parliament, Catholic Church, a couple that you might be able to guess. Of the 85, 70 are universities. 70 of the 85. So if you're looking for something with a long runway, or if you're going to bet what will exist 100 years from now, and I could list 4 or 5 businesses, even maybe the most powerful, it's more likely that Queen's University will exist 100 years from now than Google. So if you're thinking about institutions in a society, even the crown jewels of a society, it's probably the great research universities. They're frustrating, they take a long time to change sometimes, but they've been around and they're going to be around, and it's worth the time and effort to try to increase their impact, because there's a good chance the runway is going to exist for a long time. And so the question is, all right, they exist, but how do they begin to have the kind of impact that people are expecting? So there's no shortage of big problems in the world, and the interesting thing about right now is that there probably isn't an institution that any of us can name that's almost that's not facing what I would call existential issues. Will it continue to exist? And you can just go through it. The newspaper, perfect example. Is it going to exist, and if it is, what's it going to look like? And then you can go through whether it's car manufacturing, telecommunications, all the issues associated with how we live and relate to technology, and then of course these huge big problems that some of which appear here. So occasionally students will say, what's frustrating is all the really good ideas have already been taken, and I just laugh. That there's never been a time when of more rapid change, of more existential issues, and therefore more opportunity, especially for entrepreneurs who look at problems as opportunities and gravitate to those problems like moths gravitate to light. That everybody else wrings their hands and the entrepreneurs rub them together and go, oh boy, that's a big one. Let's go for it. But the bill really has come due. Enormous amounts of money have been invested in places like this. And in Canada, it's an increasing substantial portion of it is public money, where in the States we have a mix between the private and the public. Here, all the great universities really are public. So the public expects us to do more than we've done, to attack those problems and to produce students who can leave here and go after big problems. And I think what they really say is that if Queens can't do it, and if Stanford can't do it, and if MIT can't do it, if UNC can't do it, then who can? And so that was really the premise of our book, and it's our belief that there's an enormous opportunity at the intersection between innovation, which I think is very comfortable around here in most universities, and execution, which is not so much at the top of the list. And the entrepreneurship exists and functions at that intersection between innovation and execution. And when you can get entrepreneurial thinking into the mix, innovation improves, execution improves, and impact improves. And that's, again, one of the sort of premises that we proceed. So there are we have a few sort of what I would call big ideas that grow out of the book and that talk about, really focus on how a place like this or a place like our place or the other great universities can actually make this happen and can make entrepreneurship central to the fabric of a university. And the first thing is that the definition of entrepreneurship has to be broad. Entrepreneurship is not about business necessarily. It's not about commercialization necessarily. It's about a set of skills that frankly can be applied to any big problem. And how you apply them is up to you. So you bring your own values to the table. What entrepreneurship does is arm you. And there's no reason that anthropologists can't be armed, that humanists can't be armed, that scientists can't be armed, that artists can't be armed, that engineers can't be armed with the same skills and the same competencies that allow the traditional business people to function in their realm. Once armed, you're better suited and better able to go after these big problems. So one of the keys is, from the beginning, is to make sure there's a broad definition and that you've reached out and included economists and you've included sociologists and you've included humanists in the whole process. And as we go along, I'll give you some more examples, but I'll just tell you that there's this amazing venture capital fund at UNC based in the arts and sciences, and they fund, in a venture capital model, things like the Digital Humanities Project. So this is not, entrepreneurship is not just about business. And frankly, at places like this, and places like our place, the principal or the president is not going to have a statue built for him based on the number of companies that got started. I mean, that's important, but it's not central to what goes on here. New knowledge is what's central, and going after big problems is what's central, and entrepreneurship, in our view, can help do that. So here's some examples of entrepreneurs, and they aren't all, you know, your typical idea of an entrepreneur. Certainly Bill Gates you probably think of, but you might not think that of Muhammad Yunus as an entrepreneur, or Jacqueline Novogratz, who started the Acumen Fund, which is an incredible venture capital fund focused on the developing world, or the guy closest to me at the top, Gary Hirschberg, who started Stonyfield Yogurt as a for-profit business, is one of the most environmentally impactful entities that I've ever heard of or known. And he and Muhammad Yunus now have a yogurt industry in Bangladesh, and it's, I got a nod right here. Very, very cool. And so here's an entrepreneur, a for-profit entrepreneur. He sold Stonyfield to Danone. Danone then funded the deal in India. This line between for-profit and non-profit is sort of blurring, and the idea that entrepreneurs are only doing commercial stuff is passé. The second big idea in the book is that we have to open the tent. And what that means, in my view, is first, we've got to welcome people with different points of view, including people like Greg, and not just one. People, we need 10 in this place. We need one in the School of Medicine. We need one arguably in the law school. We need one in the engineering school. We use the term entrepreneur in residence as a good sort of catch term, but what really happens is entrepreneurs show up and you don't know what's going to happen. You have to have a bit of an article of faith, and you also have to not be too into control because you aren't quite sure where it's headed, but they bring a Rolodex, they bring a point of view, they help connect dots, and fabulous things happen. What we learned as we wrote the book was that most of the great universities, I don't know the history of this one, but most of the great universities were founded by a team that included an entrepreneur and an academic. Stanford, Johns Hopkins, Cornell, you can go through the list. Almost always there was a team that involved an academic and an entrepreneur, and here Desh Deshpande, connecting with many academics here, I think is another possible example of what the sort of magic that can happen when you open the tent. And it's not just to entrepreneurs, but it's to diversity. That great teams just can't be built with just engineers or just college students or just college professors or just men or just women or just people from Canada or whatever. That the real payoff is when you build diverse teams, and opening the tent is the step to getting that done. So the third thing is teach and inquire, and honestly, that's what we're here for, is to teach and inquire. And if we're not teaching entrepreneurship in the broad sense of the word, and if we're not doing research that's impactful and where entrepreneurial thinking is involved, then this is a marginal activity. A marginal activity. If it's going to be central to what we do, then there's got to be serious, substantial, substantive teaching and major research, not just on entrepreneurship, but more importantly, where entrepreneurial thinking is influencing the research and where we're focused on problems and not just disciplines. So this is an example of a course that after we wrote our book, and I'll talk more about this in a few minutes, we were flattered they wanted us to write another one, and we said no. Instead of talking the talk, we're going to try to walk the walk and teach a course open to anyone in the university. This first time around we had 420 students, and it was a course that was at the intersection between the arts, liberal arts and technology. And I'll talk more about that in a few minutes, but in this case we had the chancellor of the university, the equivalent of your principal, co-teaching the class, which was a statement in and of itself because it was the first time a chancellor had made time to teach a class, and we were reaching out to people from all over, students from all over the university, and that was a huge step in terms of transforming the culture and beginning to say, this is something that makes sense for English majors and history majors, and journalism majors, and physics majors and chemistry majors, as well as engineers and business students. And I guess this probably goes more to the professors and the administrators than the students, but to students as well, that ultimately this is about culture and not about structure. And creating an ecosystem, creating a culture that says, yes, if you can figure it out, instead of no, unless you can jump through all these hoops. Now that is a subtle difference, but if the default is, yes, let's try to figure it out, instead of the default being no, that changes a culture. If the culture is one that says it's okay to fail. Now in academia, failure, I mean, most college professors made it to where they were by not failing. And most of you made it to sitting in these seats because you didn't fail. And yet, you can't do entrepreneurship without failing. I mean, if failure is not an option, you're in the wrong place. You're going to fail. But how do you create a culture that tolerates failure? And you really can't create an entrepreneurial culture. You can't go after a big problem if you're not prepared to fail, because if it were easy, it wouldn't be a big problem. And so the odds are, now you want to learn from that failure, but how you incorporate and inculcate a willingness to fail and a celebration of it as long as you're learning something from it is really, again, central to creating a culture and an ecosystem that has an entrepreneurial bent, that has an entrepreneurial point of view, and an entrepreneurial influence. Now, I'm not saying that you want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, and we feel very strongly that the disciplines are incredibly important. In order to have that multidisciplinary team I was talking about, you need a physicist who's been trained as a physicist. You need a chemist who knows chemistry, and you need an engineer who can build something. You know, and we were talking about teams, and someone earlier said that he, I think, was a chemist or a biologist, and I said, yeah, those are great people on teams because they actually know something. Right. So it's cool to have people on your teams that actually, or who, you know, what everybody wants is somebody on your team who can write an app. Right? App writers are in short supply. And, but creating this culture is the most important and the hardest thing to do. And what I've said before is critical if you're going to succeed in that, because if everybody thinks that entrepreneurship is about starting businesses, you'll never succeed in creating the culture you're trying to create. I mean, entrepreneurship and outgrowth may be that some businesses may get started, but you do much better focusing on the world's biggest problems than you do on commercialization in terms of the overall total university. And that's where creating a culture, going after big problems, and using entrepreneurial thinking to do it is a key to sort of making all that happen. So here are a couple of examples. I was talking earlier, you know that you've created an entrepreneurial culture when stuff happens that you don't even know about. And this is an example. In our book, we wrote about the idea of campus adopting a campus-wide theme of some sort, a campus-wide problem, and then working on it multidisciplinary, across disciplines for a few years. And we thought it was kind of a cool idea. And then one day, I saw that the faculty council was voting the next day on adopting water as a campus-wide theme. It was the first I'd ever heard of it. And I was, of course, ecstatic that this was going on. And now, into its first year, we recruited a guy from Geneva who's one of the world's experts on water and the issues of water. It cuts across virtually every discipline in the university, and it's an incredibly way to organize things. You don't really organize things in university, but to give focus to things and let things happen that wouldn't happen otherwise. In this case, it's the Water Institute, and the byword is water in our world. So here's an example. This is a new slide, but I was trying to capture all the things that were going on our own campus all at one time. And honestly, when I looked at it, I didn't even know exactly what all of these things were. But it goes from the computer sciences people started an entrepreneurial lounge that's really a bit of an incubator to we have a co-working summer, we have a Launch the Venture program, we have an incubator off campus, we have a social entrepreneurship program at the Y, focusing on enterprises or projects that are going to forward the cause of social justice, but do it with an entrepreneurial bent, i.e. a top line and a bottom line. A whole set of seminars and other resources to cause that to happen. So when you begin to create a culture and you begin to create this ecosystem, all kinds of things happen. And some of this is also because you have these crazy entrepreneurs running around the campus, not really sure what they're doing, and then you look up and you go, oh my God. And there's probably an entrepreneur in residence behind every one of those projects. The good news, a lot of cool things happen. The bad news, you're not sure what they're going to be and you can't always control it. So you have to give that up a little bit. So those are some of the sort of seminal ideas that we tried to talk about in the book. We've had 3 years to think about it and a lot of help from people like you. And there are 3 new ideas that we think are really important and that we're interested in talking about, and hopefully we can talk about some together in a few minutes. The first one is, we think the action right now is at the intersection between the liberal arts and technology. I don't know how many of you have read the Isaacson biography of Steve Jobs, but you should. I mean, once you pick it up, it's hard to put down. Everything that can happen to an entrepreneur happened to this guy, times 10, on steroids. And one of the things that Steve Jobs said was the most important course he took at Reed College, anybody know what it was? Calligraphy, right. Which is why we have all those fonts, right? On the Apple. 500, I don't know, how many fonts are there? Anybody know? Hundreds, right. He cares. And he cared a lot about calligraphy. He cared a lot about design. He cared a lot about broad thinking, and he thought about Apple as something that was changing the world, not something that was selling appliances. He wanted to change the world. And frankly, all of the great entrepreneurs want to change the world. They aren't looking, you know, at, they have a bottom line, but that's so that they can change the world. So another student put it to me this way. He said, you know, before you connect the dots, you have to collect the dots. Before you connect the dots, you have to collect the dots. And we think liberal arts, whether it's taking a few liberal arts courses or being a liberal arts major, is not a bad education for entrepreneurship, because it broadens you out a little bit. It causes you to understand where the problems might really be. And it also is a problem solve, helps you with problem solving. So all of you aren't liberal arts people, but if you are looking for a team, having a history major or an English major in your team might sound really crazy. Might not be as crazy as you think. They bring a whole perspective and a whole different point of view. And honestly, if you look at Apple, and if Steve Jobs were here, he would say that's what Apple is about, the intersection between liberal arts and technology. So we think that's a big deal, and it's worth spending time on. In our big course that we taught, the 400-person course, we picked 30 of the most important musical pieces we thought in the world. Half were classical, half were contemporary. We played one before every class, and there was a little introduction about what the music was. And the students are sort of scratching their heads and thinking, God, what's up with this? You know, Rolling Stones or Rite of Spring or, you know, Haydn or Mozart. At the end, it was one of the favorite parts of the course. And we actually had a few test questions on it too. So there's we created a playlist on Spotify. If you go to Econ 125 on Spotify, you can see our playlist, 32 songs. And it's everything from Be My Baby to Rite of Spring. So this is something we really believe in, and we think it's worth paying attention to, that no matter what you're doing in your education, a spreadsheet by itself isn't going to get you there as an entrepreneur. Okay, the second thing we really think is important is this whole online education thing. And the whole MOOC thing. Do people know what a MOOC is? Some of you? Massive open online course, hundreds of thousands of students. It's right now in the wild, 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 wild west. It's totally crazy. No one has a business model for it, etc. But it's really important. And here's where I learned how important it was. We had the good fortune of having Michael Porter talk to our class. So Michael Porter's a strategist at Harvard, generally thought of as maybe the great strategist in the world, or one of the great strategists in the world. And he's written a little piece, 14 pages long. It's now free, called What is Strategy? And in my view, if it's one of the 4 or 5 most important things for any entrepreneur to read. What is strategy? So Michael Porter gives the lecture, and guess what the lecture is? What is strategy? Okay. And it's unbelievable. You know, we thought he would sort of mail it in. He didn't. He gave a breathtaking lecture. And of course, we filmed it. It was on video and everything else. End of class, we're starting to think about next year, and I'm thinking, there is no way that I'm going to ask Michael Porter to come back to the class and give the same lecture again. That's stupid. And then I'm thinking, whoa, how many times have I gone back and given the same lecture again? Oh, it's the 3rd day of class. I'm going to give X lecture. Well, as we started thinking about MOOCs and we started thinking about online education, it forced us to start thinking about education generally. And we began to understand that the classroom model that we all love may not make as much sense as we think of anymore. So we said, what would we do with Michael Porter if we already had this lecture? And we thought, well, how about if everybody watched the lecture before they came to class in their dorm room or whatever else? And then what if, even in a big class, we picked 2 or 3 teams, because we have teams that are working on projects, and we did a strategy session, a planning session, in front of the whole class to try to implement what it was that Michael Porter was teaching. Wouldn't that be a cooler way of doing strategy than the way we're doing it right now? And frankly, the MOOCs have forced, I think, a lot of people to start thinking differently about education. And certainly Khan Academy and the book that he wrote, which is also pretty interesting, I think we're going to see major upheaval in university education. I think there's going to be much more what there's called flipping the classroom, where what used to happen in the classroom happens outside the classroom, and what used to happen outside the classroom is happening inside the classroom. Now, how that is going to all play out, no one knows. All these people are trying to figure it out. There's no business model yet, period. No business model. That's good for an entrepreneur, okay? It's still wide open. If you're looking for places where there's still going to be openings, higher education is going to be one of them, because these guys haven't figured it out, and neither has anybody else. Okay, so the third thing is there's an enormous impetus right now. None of us can go around without someone, whether a parent, a funder, a donor, saying, yeah, but is my kid going to get a job? Are you educating him for this job? Are you educating him for, you know, what? And your parents are asking the same thing. You're majoring in what? Is that going to help you get a job? The fact of the matter is that places like this are educating you for jobs that don't exist yet. Because who wants a job that already exists? I mean, just think about it. When you were, maybe there were a few first-year students here now, but the best jobs that are going to exist 4 years from now, we don't even know what they are when students come here for the first time. Google's only 14 years old. Google is 14 years old, makes over $1 billion in profit a month. A month. So educating students for particular jobs is lunacy. The other fact is, we aren't very good at that. We aren't very good at teaching. I mean, business schools may be a little bit better, but our core competency is not as much about how do you, nuts and bolts, entry-level skills, is about ways of thinking, about adapting for what's going to be that really cool job that you want when you graduate, or 3 or 4 or 5 years out and that you're going for, and no one knows how to train you for that. So I'll give you a quick example. We have a student right now, Abby Bouchon. And Abby Bouchon is a senior, and she was a journalism major, and she could have learned about PR or writing stories or headline writing or any of the typical things you learn in journalism school. She is obsessed with Google Plus right now, and how Google Plus might be adapted for higher education using Hangouts and using all the technology that and Google is now investing a lot. It was kind of a bust when it first came out, and now it's really getting traction. I saw Joe Biden did a Google Hangout yesterday, and so it's actually very cool with a lot of functionality. So she got obsessed with it. She's learned everything that she can about it. She is helping us think through what a MOOC might look like using Google+. She's involved Google, and she had an interview at Google today. I don't know how it went. But there's no way, 4 years when she started, that we could have said, what we want to do is prepare you to get a job working with Google+, okay? Because it didn't exist. So the payoff, in our view, is to be courageous, tell people that what we're doing is not trying to teach everybody an entry-level skill so they can get that first job. We're trying to teach people a way of thinking, a point of view. The liberal arts are important there, and so is the whole discipline of problem solving and thinking broadly and collecting some dots before you connect the dots so that you'll be equipped for jobs that don't exist yet. Because again, who wants a job that already exists? So and there you go. That's where, in the States, that's where everybody wants to work right now. You go in there, and it's someone like me who I think of myself as sort of being forward-looking. I get very confused when I go into Google. It's like, what is going on, and who's in charge? And the answer is, it's hard to explain what's going on, and it doesn't appear that anyone's in charge. But some amazing things happen. And what they are looking for, by the way, are not somebody who can sort of check a bunch of boxes. I mean, they do this incredibly competitive interviewing and that kind of stuff, and have a series of their own tests, all designed to test problem solving, independent thinking, that kind of stuff. Not the kind of stuff you can do just by checking the boxes. Now, that isn't to say you shouldn't learn some of those skills, but honestly, some of the accounting skills and some of the other things that you really need to learn, some of that you can do online now. So there's a lot to think about with some of these issues, and some of it has to do with as a university, what are our really great core competencies? What can we do that nobody else can do? And we need to be doing more of those things and less of the things that anybody could do. Okay, so those are the three new ideas. If there's a takeaway, everybody wants to take away, it's that we have a huge responsibility in places like this. We've been given more than maybe any other institutions in our society. But the bills come due, and we have a big responsibility now. We have a responsibility to you all, the students, to educate you for jobs that don't exist yet. And we have a responsibility to the public to go after big problems, use a diversity of thinking, including entrepreneurial thinking, and go after those problems and truly make a difference in the world. So with that, I want to thank you again for coming out, and I'm anxious to hear your thoughts, questions, and ideas. Thank you.